If you have your QT book, if you have your Bibles, let's turn to Galatians chapter 1, verse 11 to 24. Today, I'm going to give a little bit of a background about this book because I think for us to kind of understand what's kind of going on in this book and kind of understand the structure and the flow of this book, I think it's important for us to kind of understand the background of it. So let me give, please stay with me. I know it's going to be a little bit historical here and there, but please stay with me. And once you kind of understand the setup and the setting and the kind of the historical background of this book, it's gonna make a lot more sense as we do our QT together. So I just want to give a little bit. If you've been doing your QTs and stuff like that, so. In the book of Acts, when Jesus is ascended to heaven, he instructs his disciples to wait in Jerusalem and receive the Holy Spirit, right? So the disciples wait in Jerusalem and they receive the Holy Spirit, and what happens is we see the gospel starts spreading everywhere, right? So in Jerusalem, it starts with the Jewish believers and the gospel starts spreading everywhere. So there is this movement where the Jewish people hear the gospel of Jesus, receives it, and they becomes a disciple of Jesus, right? So now it was always God's intention and purpose for the gospel to include all people, every nation, race, tribe, and tongue. So as we follow the book of Acts, what we now see is we begin to see non-Jewish believers, right? Non-Jewish people hear the gospel of Jesus and receive it as well. So we begin to see these two groups as we continue on the book of Acts. Is one group is we see the traditional Jewish believers who trace their lineage all the way back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but more importantly, who they still believed in the practicing the Torah and Mosaic law, right? So kind of picture this, right? There's this one kind of traditional Jewish group that is forming here, right? Now, there were non-Jewish believers, which is also called Gentiles, right? And they did not necessarily trace their lineage back to the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but also they did not necessarily believe in practice of laws of Torah or Mosaic law, right? So they believe that Torah and Mosaic law, if you guys been in Pastor Cho's Bible study, the Torah and Mosaic law was actually very specifically given to the Israelites, right? So the Gentile believers that came to know the Lord, they didn't really necessarily see that these Torah and this Mosaic law was applying to them, right? So there's this little bit of a tension between them, right? So as you follow the book of Acts, in Acts 15, there's this great debate that bursts forth, right? Where the traditional Jewish believers, right, they're arguing to the non-Jewish believers, saying that in order for you to be truly one of us and be part of God's family, you need to follow the law, right? The law of Judea, the Torah and the law of Moses. You need to follow that. And so there was this tension that rose between them. So we see that as the Christianity is growing, not just only to the Jewish believers, but the non-Jewish believers, we see this debate that arising. The reason why I want to note that is the background of Galatians is Paul is writing his letter to Galatians to specifically address the issue that came from this debate and this tension. Okay, so the background was, so what happened was some of the Jewish believers that came to Galatian church started to proclaim that in order to truly follow Jesus or to be saved, you need to be circumcised by laws of Torah, right? So just think of this with me, right? So these traditional Jewish believers, they came to the church of Galatia and they start to proclaim that, hey, in order for you to truly be saved and in order for you to truly be a follower of Jesus, okay, all non-Jewish people had to do circumcision. They had to get their circumcision, right? And so there was this tension that rise. So they were demanding circumcision on all male non-Jewish believers. So here's another issue that arose, which were they were not only doing that, but they were questioning Paul's authority because the gospel that Paul preached was you're not saved by the law, you're saved by grace, right? And then these traditional Jewish believers came, and that what their claim is, no. So they were adding things to the gospel, okay? So there was this, so Paul was actually facing kind of like these two kind of a conflicts here, right? Number one, they were distorting and switching up things in the gospel, right? And they were adding things to the gospel. And then second, they were questioning Paul's authority, whether he was a legitimate teacher. Okay, so that's kind of the situation that was going on in Galatians. And as we understand that, as we kind of have knowledge about the background, and as we read the book of Galatians, it's going to give us a better understanding of how the story flows. So let me just say this. So in verse 11 and 12, what we see today is that it says, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel I preach to you is not a human origin, right? I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it. Rather, I received it by revelation of Jesus Christ. So we see, here's also another thing that I'm going to say about the book of Galatians that's interesting. Many pastors call it Paul's most frustrating and most angry letter. Okay, so it's kind of interesting because when you look at Paul's writings, like kind of stylistically wise, it's kind of very similar. So there's a greeting, there's a blessing, there's exaltation, there's a prayer, and then Paul gets to his point, right? What happened in Galatians is we call it Paul's angry letter, right? Because it's kind of like that email that you get from your boss on Monday morning, right? It's kind of like say good morning, and there's no like, hey, hope you had a good weekend, but it's like, good morning, why did you guys mess up? Who did this? Like, who's fixing this? It's kind of like that letter, right? Because what happens is Paul kind of gives the introduction, and he kind of jumps into conclusion, right? So if you look at yesterday's passage, right, the Paul's tone and the language that he uses is very sharp, right? He says, if you're hearing a gospel from different than mine, curse be to you, right? Like he kind of like is very sharp and frustrated. So a lot of pastors actually say the Galatians is Paul's most angry letter, right? So that's kind of like the background of Galatians, right? So Paul is frustrated, right? That the wrong gospel, the distorted gospel is spreading at the same time that they're questioning Paul's authority, right? And Paul's teaching. So let me just say this. Verse 11 and 12, Paul defends the gospel right here, right? So more importantly, what he's saying is the gospel that Paul received, it's not came from him nor our human origin, right? So let me just say this. The gospel is perfect. The gospel that we have is perfect. Nothing can be added nor taken away. It is the power of God to bring all the people to salvation, and it is the only way that God saves us. Okay? So once again, the gospel that we have is perfect. We cannot add anything or take away anything out of it. But more importantly, it did not come from a human being. It did not come from, so that's what Paul is declaring here is the gospel that I preached to you, that I received to you, it wasn't even from me. It was directly from Jesus, right? The Lord, right? And so here's another thing about the gospel is God is the one who initiated the gospel. God is the one who designed it, and God is the one who delivers it, right? It has nothing to do with us, right? God is the one who initiates the gospel, initiates the salvation. God is the one who designed it, and God is the one who delivers it. So now we must respond to the gospel, but the gospel itself, the finished work of the cross, the death and the resurrection of Jesus is by God and God alone. He's the author of salvation, and it has nothing to do with us, right? So once again, nothing can be added, nothing can be taken away. So the problem was that in Galatian church, they rejected this gospel, right? That was the issue. They rejected this gospel, and then they were moving towards more law and work-based salvation, right? So their claim was, if you don't follow this law, or if you don't get circumcised, then you cannot be saved or follow Jesus. Okay, so what happened was this gospel that was by grace, by the work of the cross alone, became more of, hey, like it's by your works, by your deeds, by your obedience, right? And And this created once again distorted version of the gospel. And the gospel that Paul preached and the gospel that we believe is that, we're not saved by law, but we're saved by grace through faith. And that was the gospel that Paul preached. So let me ask you guys this. So what does this kind of look like in a modern day, right? And I think in our current modern day, I think we have this idea, right, where if we just become a better person, right, or if I just become a better, like a version of myself, if I just become morally better, right, or like if I do more good works, right, that somehow I can save myself, right, that somehow I can obtain salvation, right? But the reality is, you cannot save yourself, right? Only God can. So a better version of you, a better moral version of you is not going to save you, right? It's only through Jesus, it's only through Christ that you'll be saved. So I'm just gonna, once again, we're saved by grace through faith, but most importantly, our entire Christian walk is only by grace. It's never us. And that actually frees us because the gospel is not a performance-based, right? It's grace-based, right? So, God's love for us is secure and eternal. And there's nothing that we can do to make him love us more or make him, love us less, right? So, gospel is by grace. Another thing that I do just want to kind of cover here is if you look at verse 13 through 24, Paul is not only defending the gospel, but also he's defending his position as an apostle. So the verse 11 to 12, he's defending the gospel, but then the verse 13 to 24, he's defending his position, claiming that he's not a false teacher. What's kind of interesting about the structure of this passage was that is as if Paul is giving his testimony. Right? It's as if Paul is kind of presents the gospel and then kind of says how this gospel kind of changed him, right? So when we had a testimony night for our EM young adults on Thursday, and as I was listening to about it, as I was listening to the testimonies, what I could clearly see was the before Jesus and kind of like the after Jesus, right? The transformation, right? And when you look at this passage, that's what Paul is saying. He's saying, I was, right? I did persecute the church, right? I was, zealous and zeal for a Mosaic law, but now because of the gospel, right? I'm a changed man, right? This is who I became. Right? So there's this transformation that Paul talks about through this passage. And I think sharing his testimony, Paul mentions, I used to persecute church. I used to be passionate about keeping all the law, but the gospel of Jesus changed me. So I just want to end by saying this. The power of the gospel, okay? The power of the gospel is not that it only saves us, but it transforms our hearts. It transforms our inner being, right? So during one of the sermons in EM, I mentioned about this, saying that, when you're walking with Jesus, right? When you claim that you're a believer and when you walk with Jesus, something inside of you, there has to be some kind of transformation inside of you. Right? It is impossible for you to claim that you've been walking with the Lord 10, 20 years and have no change to you at all. Right? Because that's what gospel does. It transforms us, right? Transforms our hearts and inner being to the beauty and the character of Jesus, right? So the more you walk with him, the more you spend time with him, our character and our hearts is shaped and molded by the beauty, right? And the character of Jesus. Right? And that's what Paul is saying here, right? The truth of the gospel must not be distorted, and nor a different gospel cannot be preached, right? So that's why Paul is fiercely defending the gospel, because this gospel that we have is not only through grace, right? By faith alone, but at the same time, there's a power in this gospel that transforms and changes us, right? So once again, I just want to say this point. The gospel is perfect, okay? the gospel that we have is the perfect, right? It's the power of God to bring salvation for all humanity. And nothing can be added or taken away from the gospel that we have. It is a perfect plan of God, right? And second, okay, just like how gospel transformed Paul's life, and not just his life, not just external behavior, but that he changed, the gospel changed Paul's heart and inner being. The gospel also must transform and change us, right? And that's the power of the gospel, right? It just doesn't change us externally, but it changes us from inside out, right? That's the power of the gospel. So let's bow our heads real quick. We're going to spend some time in prayer. One thing that I do just want to pray is, as it did to Paul in today's passage, that this beauty and the wonder and the power of the gospel, right, is to be restored in our hearts again, right? Sometimes we get so familiar with the stories, we get so familiar with the Bible and the church that we sometimes lose the wonder, right? So what I'm going to pray is today, may your heart be awakened once again to the wonder and the beauty of the gospel, right? And let it, and not just, just kind of like passing away saying that, oh, I know about this, but to go really deep in our hearts, to transform us, to change us, all right? So let's just go before the Lord right now and take some time to pray.